Arktika.1 is the kind of game that makes you glad you bought a VR headset. It's the kind of game that makes you glad you shelled out so much cash on something that most people just write off as a gimmick. Developed by 4A Games, it's a game with a similar premise to the Metro franchise set in a post-apocalyptic future, where the world has entered a second ice age as a result of global warming. However, humans don't live under the surface in metro tunnels hiding from aliens, but the game is still in an Eastern European setting, taking place across a frozen wasteland and its surrounding environments. Working with a woman named Victoria, who's wearing an outfit that looks like it's been painted on, you'll complete various missions defending yourself and the Citadel against a guy named Jack and his gang of marauders, completing the odd puzzle here and there, as well as exploring the mysterious origins of creatures called the Baba Yaga. Sadly though, Arktika doesn't really explore any kind of moral dilemmas or make us question our existence or humanity. Instead, it's just mostly about shooting things. It does delve into Victoria's history and give a bit of a backstory to Jack as an antagonist, but that's nothing more than just exposition.
There you are, the shiny new star from Citadel Security.
Now, I said before how this is the kind of game that makes you glad you bought a VR headset, and I really do stand by that statement for a number of reasons. Mostly just because Arktika always manages to make really good use of the Oculus Touch controllers in a unique and creative way, giving you lots of ways to interact with objects in the environment, from simple things like pulling levers and pressing buttons on a computer or control panel, but also in the ways you can dynamically affect the environment. There's a couple of times when you're in a pitch black area, for instance, and you need to grab these glow sticks from a dispenser before physically shaking the glow stick to make it active. Then you can throw it in front of you to light the path ahead. During combat segments, you can quite often grab a nearby object and turn it into a makeshift shield against enemies, peeking above it to take shots at them before popping back under. Reloading weapons depends on the type of weapon you're using. For revolvers, you flick the revolver to the side to open the cylinder, then flick it back shut again. Probably the most tricky is the break action revolver, because you kind of have to flick it downward really fast, then flick it back upwards to shut it again, which is kind of finicky. With pistols, you bring the pistol down to your hip and snap it back up again to simulate reloading the magazine, and you're free to equip whichever you prefer in your left or right hand. And once you get the hang of this, you'll be shooting and reloading in a flash like some kind of post-apocalyptic John Wick. Combine this with the various attachments and weapon upgrades that allow increased damage, ammo capacity, as well as perks like laser sights and being able to highlight enemies through solid objects. Then considering there's over a half dozen guns all up, which leaves a fair bit of customization on offer for the player. Even after I'd found a combination of guns and attachments that worked for me, I still wanted to bugger around with the other guns just out of curiosity to see how they handled, which I think will also add a good amount of replayability. I kinda wish they had a bit more variety here though in terms of weapons. I mean, they are after all just basically pistols or revolvers, but I think this might have been done for balancing, because using automatic weapons probably would have made the game a bit of a cakewalk. Outside of shooting things though, even the basic puzzles make really good use of the controllers, requiring a bit of thinking outside of just pulling levers and flicking switches. Arktika's probably got the best implementation of the touch controllers I've seen in an Oculus game yet, and it's constantly thinking outside of the box with ways you can complete the task at hand, no pun intended. Movement is limited entirely to teleportation, but it's teleportation to fixed points, kind of like how it was in the Bullet Train tech demo. Once you've teleported to a point, you're free to move your body around and duck down for cover, lean around corners and all that, but you're not given any control outside of these points. There's just a bunch of them that are preset, and you pick the one that suits you the best. Now, I can understand how this might be an issue for certain people. I mean, I know a small demographic of VR gamers prefer Locomotion Controls, which I just don't understand because that makes me want to barf within minutes. But I actually don't mind this control scheme. There is the odd moment when you're on some kind of moving platform or in an elevator, and this could kind of bring out the motion sickness in some people, but it is pretty minimal stuff, and considering I'm an absolute pussy when it comes to this kind of thing and I was fine, I mean, I think most folks would be fine too. Also, the fact that once you teleport, you're already looking exactly where you need to be looking means there's no fumbling around or the potential for teleporting facing the wrong direction. You're faced exactly where you need to be faced, and you can just go right into shooting things. There is also too, I think, a bit of skill and timing in choosing these points, as some points offer you a better vantage point to ambush enemies, but at the expense of having less cover as a means of protection. Obviously too though, in the ones where you're more hidden, the downside is going to be that it might be trickier to get a clear shot on those that are shooting you. Arktika isn't really the hardest game in the world though. The abundance of weapon upgrades you get make you pretty much unstoppable, like even early on, and there's not really any kind of enemy type that proves to be a nuisance outside of maybe the snipers. And throughout the entire 10 missions, I didn't even die a single time, nor did I even really come close. Strategies for the boss fights are obvious within seconds, and the teleportation mechanic makes it just too easy to just zip back and forth between points before the boss can even realise what's happened. Again, comparing it to the Metro series, it's not really that kind of hardcore, get through by the skin of your teeth kind of shooter. This is also easily one of the best looking VR games ever made. It's obviously been developed by 4A Games, and just like the Metro games, if you've played them, you'll know just how much of an attention to detail these developers have when it comes to the visuals. And Arktika is no exception. It just looks amazing at times with superb lighting effects, great looking particle effects for water and snow, and just really good animation across the board. The way that enemies kind of trip and stumble for cover as you're firing on them just looks awesome. The sound too is just really top notch. From the satisfying sound effects when you're firing weapons, the enemy chatter during combat as they shout to one another, and the overall soundtrack which ramps up or down depending on the circumstance. It is a very similar game visually to the Metro series, with lots of bandit-style enemies decked out in shooter military-looking attire. Then you've got gross and deformed mutants with a backdrop of dimly lit tunnels and condemned buildings. But it all just looks really awesome, and the amount of detail on offer here really trumps anything else I've seen in a VR game. But look, it ain't all sunshine and roses though. There were a few things that I kinda didn't like about the game. For starters, I don't like how there's no kind of main menu. Once you load the game up, it just throws you right into the action without so much as a loading screen. The options menu is also extremely barren, particularly the graphics options, and this is something that VR games just need to stop doing. We need VR games to have more inclusions for settings to tweak, like, PC games have been doing for decades. Simply having graphics options falling under like 3 or 4 preset settings just doesn't cut the mustard. I also don't like the lack of any noticeable checkpoint or autosave notifications. Now, unless I miss something, the game just never tells you when it's saved your progress. After playing one mission for about 15 minutes, I had to quit out of it to go and get dinner, thinking it would have saved my progress at some point, but when I loaded the game back up, it put me right back into the starting area, and I had to play the entire mission from scratch. I also had to replay the lengthy prologue sequence because even after I'd assumed it had finished, it still didn't save my progress at that point. Arktika does have a decent length to it though, for a VR game anyway. You're looking at about 4 or 5 hours all up with 10 missions in total, and after you've finished, you're able to go back and replay any mission to complete all the challenges and obtain the best possible rank. Some people complain about the length of VR games, but I think this is about as long as it needs to be, considering you're standing up like an asshole the entire time. I don't really want to be standing around for 8 to 10 hours, it's not my idea of a good time. If I wanted to do that, I'd go back to working in hospitality. Overall, Arktika is a pretty damn good experience. It's at times action-packed, it's at times scary and tense, but it never loses its momentum and always manages to keep throwing new things at the player. It's a shame most people are going to probably write this thing off as just another boring-looking interactive shooting gallery because they're missing out on one of the better shooting games available for the platform, and just a pretty kick-ass shooting game in general. And if you haven't played anything with your Oculus lately, well, this is definitely worth dusting off the headset for and checking out.
Good job. You made it look easy.